Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talk Now Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me today is going to be Greg Rigby. And we're going to talk about his book, The God's Secret. I'm not sure how long this book's been out, but I saw it on the internet and it attracted my attention. I went to his website and I've checked into it. I haven't had a chance to read his book yet, but from what I've gathered, he's telling us that the story of creation is in the stars, and there's actual evidence on the ground to support this theory, and I thought it'd be interesting to have him come on the air and explain all this here to you folks, my listeners. Greg, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Nice to talk to you, Royce.
And it's nice to talk to you. Usually when I start my show out, Greg, what I like to do is ask my guests to tell a little something about themselves and, what got them interested and what the material that they were writing in their book to kind of, break the ice.
Okay. Well, I got interested because a long time ago, in the 80s, I guess, somebody gave me a book to read called made a proposition. It made a proposition that some of the cathedrals in northern France duplicated the constellation of Virgo, which I thought was quite strange. And because I get intrigued by strange things, I decided to investigate it. So I started a process of pinpointing the exact locations of the cathedrals in Northern Europe and the abbeys and the ancient Celtic monuments in Northern Europe. And I got all the locations and I plotted them very carefully and accurately. And what I discovered was that the proposition made in Charpentier's book wasn't true, but that what was true was that the constellation of Ursa Major, which you probably know as the Big Dipper, is duplicated very, very accurately across the whole of northern France and into western Germany. And the cup of this constellation, the two angles of the cup, were both 108 degrees. Now, I don't know if that means anything to you, but it should do because, the pentagon is a very important shape in the American psychology of things. And the two angles of 108 degrees point to the idea that this cup held a regular pentagon, which was just intriguing to say the least. It was just massive. And so I wrote a book which I published called On Earth as It Is in Heaven, where I published those findings. But I couldn't stop there because the question of, why would that be the case intrigued me. And so I then started a fairly intensive research into the whole question of Ursa Major, the Big Dipper constellation, and the pentagram and all of that stuff. So that's where it all started.
Okay. Now, what you actually saw in the stars and found was the actual Adam and Eve story that was in the Bible, which also matches the Egyptian creation story. Is my understanding correct?
It is. Let me see if I can explain this to you.
Okay.
What happens is the Earth wobbles. It's sort of like a spinning top. And what we think of as the North Star, the northern pole, the point which is that North Star is in a circle. Because the Earth's wobbling, it makes a circle in the sky. And this circle takes about 26,000 years to complete. It's a big circle and takes a long time. But the period that we think of as the beginnings of civilization, 5,000 BC down to 2,000 BC, down to 0 BC, if you like, that period was the period where the Ursa Major constellation, Big Dipper, was the pole position was going through that constellation. And this Big Dipper, if you looked up at it, was going round in a circle immediately round the pole position. Now, I'm sure you can imagine how in the ancients of times when people weren't as knowledgeable as they are today and not very sophisticated, there were no street lights and there was no TV, the stars and the patterns they made were very important to people. And the place that everything circulated around was thought of to be the God position, where God was. everything circulated around it. It was like the number one place in the sky, if you like. Now this place, this constellation of Ursa Major, is amazing because almost all the stories in the Bible and all the pictures in the Bible can be shown all in that place. You can, if you go to this place, if you know where to look, you can see Adam, you can see Eve, you can see the devil, you can see the tree, you can see the apples. All of those things are visible. It's just a matter of knowing where to look. Not only that, if you look at other things in the Bible, the name of God in Hebrew, in Egyptian, in Greek, all of which are mentioned in the book of Revelation, they're all there to be seen.
That sounds very fascinating, and I didn't mean to interrupt you. I apologize.
It's okay, go ahead.
So, now when you say that you can see these apples, the devil, the star, and all that in the stars, are you saying that these stars, if you look in the right place, are like connect the dot patterns, only the stars act as dots?
Exactly that. And you might say to me, not unreasonably, well, if you connect dots between stars, you can draw anything. Well, of course, that's true. What you can't do is draw all these important things in all exactly the same place. Do you understand? I mean, I could draw a picture of, get some stars in one part of the sky, and I could draw anything you like, really. But when you start to draw everything in the same place, you know, you can draw the eagle and the calf and the lamb. And you can draw the sword and the cup. You know, all the things which are central to our beliefs about the Judeo-Christian religion and the iconographics that came from that. They're all there. They're all in exactly the same place. Just a matter of just moving things around a little bit.
Okay. Now, you say that this was also being recorded on the ground in stone. Was that correct?
Correct. In particular, the constellation of Ursa Major is on the ground over a distance of 300 miles. And I'll give you for instance, the two alpha stars of the two alpha positions. One of them is Chartres Cathedral, which is obviously one of the most important cathedrals in France. But that cathedral is built on an ancient Celtic religious site. Rheims Cathedral, Reims, you probably call it, Rheims, and Saint-Quentin, with Saint Quentin. They are both very prominent cathedrals, and again were constructed on ancient Celtic religious sites. You know, and then the last star right over in Western Germany is at a place called Donnersberg. If you've ever been to West Germany, you'll know that Donnersberg is the site of a Celtic fort. So here we've got this pattern on the ground that isn't a Christian pattern, albeit that there's some cathedrals at the locations. It was a pattern that was put down in ancient Celtic times, in very ancient times. Fascinating, really.
Yeah, now I've heard many people have made the claim that the pyramids at Giza, Robert Bauval is amongst the list of people who stated this, is made to mimic the Orion constellation. And what you're telling me is there's other places on Earth that mimic Ursa Major. Now, while you're following this, then, should we not be able to, if we looked at major landmarks, be able to find the story on the planet in the artwork left behind on the planet by the ancients?
That may be the case. I've not researched that, Royce, but that may well be the case. I don't know. But, you know, to the ancients, when they looked up, that was where God was. That's where they thought the gods and God was. And so therefore it was a sacred thing, and the patterns of the star were very sacred to them. So the idea that they duplicated that on the ground is not a strange idea at all. It's quite a reverential thing, you know.
But this, I understand about it being reverential, but it wasn't the same as, say, like planet worship either, though, was it?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't there, Royce. You know, there may have been some cults or some groups or that, you know, had particular affinities to certain planets or certain stars in certain locations. I don't know. I haven't done that research, and so I couldn't make any claim about that.
Well, see, I asked because I'm kind of curious as to what would be on the planets besides the fact they were up in space that would draw such attention and make them this important to mimic them on their. I mean, these stoneworks that they built were big and massive. They required a lot of work.
Sure, you're talking about Easter Island, places like that you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, well, the answer is I don't know. I mean, people were no different then than they are now. We sort of think that people back then must have been a bit uncivilized. No, they were obviously quite bright. If they could carve stones like they did on Easter Island, they weren't stupid, were they? There was somebody a bit bright there. Now, what they were trying to say, I honestly don't know.
Well, from my way of thinking, they obviously had to be a lot brighter than given credit for. Even Michael Tellinger has recently found a site that huge city, big stoneworks in that metropolitan area, 250,000 years old, which is well before what science tells us is when people were in caves.
Right.
So they had to be a lot smarter than given credit for. Just that people are not doing, are not documenting research as they find it, or they're biased about what they're documenting, or there's a ball evidently been dropped somewhere down the road.
Well, the problem is that a lot of historical records got lost. Most of the historical records were kept in the library at Alexandria during what you and I would consider to be the beginnings of history.
Right.
And the Romans went in and burnt the place and took all the records. So, the only records that were left were monuments and hieroglyphics and paintings on walls. That's all we've got to go on, really. So, we can look at those and we can look at the patterns of them and the way they faced and what they were facing at certain times of the day and of the year. And we can look at the paintings on the walls of the Egyptian temples, and they tell us something. I mean, there's one famous tomb in Egypt, which is called the Tomb of Sennacherib. And the pictures inside it are very well published. They're all over the place. And Sennacherib means servant in the place of truth, which is an interesting sort of description. But when you go inside, they've got this picture of what they call Osiris. He's one of the Egyptian gods. But if you join what are obviously prominent points in this picture, little protrusions, and you join them all up, what you get is a perfect pentagram. So here we've got ancient Egypt. We've got very, very clever mathematicians who were trying to tell us something in the place of truth. What truth? Well, that's for us to conjecture, I guess. But there's an example, the pictures, and there's pictures there, and they tell stories. What can I tell you?
Yeah, it's almost as if they knew that this information would be destroyed at some point because of the way they were building it. It wasn't like they just didn't put them on clay tablets or something that could just be read, in other words.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
So to them, they must have, you would think, had some knowledge of what was going to happen. And I'm thinking it was maybe in the stars. If their point of reference for God, the story of Adam and Eve was in the stars, and other stories from the Bible was in the stars, then perhaps this was their means of telling prophecy, in other words.
Yeah. Well, you see, I think, and this is just my supposition, the first god king for the Egyptians was this guy called Osiris. But if you think about it, Adam had to be the first god king. I mean, if he's the first man on earth, then he's the first man, but he's obviously the first god, because there's nobody else, is there? There's only him and his folk. So the story about Adam and Eve sort of intertwines with the ancient Egyptian story of what was called Osiris and Isis. They're the same people. And so the stories of Osiris are really worth examining, because the Egyptians documented them quite well. And they told you where he lived. And in the Book of the Dead, they tell you that Osiris lived in the constellation of Ursa Major. He lived in the Big Dipper. They tell you that. Oh, this is really interesting, because that's where I think these guys are. You know what I mean? It's just fascinating stuff.
That is pretty fascinating, because that lends credence to the ancient astronaut theory that our gods originally came from the stars.
Well, that may be the case. I don't know. I
mean, if the ancients recorded he lived there, then he had to have means to get back and forth.
Yeah, well, that's true. The theory that there's an ancient civilization in the world, technological civilization, I don't give a lot of credence to that, and let me explain to you why. If you look what we've done in the last 200 years, we have almost depleted the oil resources of the planet. Yeah? Now, I can tell you, if there'd been another technological era in ancient times, there would be no oil net today. The fact that it's still there and the fact that we can exploit it means that it wasn't taken some time ago. So I don't think that there was a big technological period in ancient times. There may have been an intelligence that arrived, but they didn't build a big technological society.
Well, see, that's the one that I would have to question on that one, Greg. Here's the reason why I would tell you this is there's a possibility that maybe they did have a technology, but it was not an oil-based technology. Let's just entertain for a moment that maybe perhaps we were visited from outer space. Perhaps if they taught us any kind of technology, it may not have dealt with oil because maybe they depleted all their oil.
Yeah, well, maybe that's true. I don't know. You could be right.
Now, I don't know if I am right or not, but I do know that it seems to me there had to be some kind of technology to enable them to build like the Giza Pyramid, Stonehenge, the statues at Easter Island. How did they do this without any kind of technology?
Sure, no, I understand that. I do understand it. It would have been extremely difficult. Doesn't mean to say they couldn't have done it. All it means is without technology it would have been very, very difficult. I agree.
They would have to know something or do, I don't know, without, like you said, without actually being there or at least attempting to recreate it, it'd really be kind of hard to say, wouldn't it?
Yeah, we're all guessing. I agree with you.
Just a second. And I do apologize for this.
Right.
The truth is I have emphysema, and I sometimes end up coughing.
Okay.
I do apologize for that, and we was going along so good with this conversation.
All right.
But, because, I mean, for me, this is a very fascinating subject. We discussed at the beginning of the show that anybody that does any research into ancient religion, ancient mythology, and ancient mysteries at all, they begin to learn that our history is not what we've been taught, and it's not what the church has taught, either one. And we really begin to learn, like you said, and I think you and me both agree on, that nobody really knows for sure what it is.
No, I agree with that. One thing I can tell you, though, and I mentioned this in the book, is that in about the 12th, 13th, 14th century in Europe, there was something that happened which proved that someone in the church, what would have been the Catholic Church then, knew about all of this. And let me explain to you what happened. When I plotted all the cathedrals and abbeys and all of that sort of stuff in France, what I discovered was that there were 2 abbeys which were constructed and were then moved. So one of the abbeys was the abbey called Clairvaux, which is one of the founding abbeys of the Cistercian order, which was founded at about the same time of the Knights Templar. So, you know, they're part of this whole mysterious thing that took place with the Templars. And they built this abbey at Clairvaux, but then a few years later they moved the abbey, and when I say moved it, not very far, they moved it about 500 yards. Now, what you've got to understand is the then connection with the pattern was absolutely perfect. You know, so they moved this place, and
so somebody knew about the story in the stars, and they could see that this was not placed correctly, and they were correcting it.
Spot on. Exactly that. And then the other one was an abbey called Citeaux, which was also one of the founding abbeys of the Cistercian order. And that too was moved, and that too created a massively accurate alignment once it was moved. So it wasn't just one. They did 2 of the founding abbeys of the order, and then moved them after they'd built them. And this is at a time, you know, we're talking about the 12th, 13th century. There were no trucks. You know, there was only horses and carts and hammers and chisels and like that. And so they reconstructed an abbey, you know, a few 100 yards away from where they constructed the first one, Why on earth did they do that? Well,
And this is somebody with the Catholic Church?
yeah. Oh no, this is the Cistercian order. They were a religious order that was founded in France, and they were part of the whole Catholic thing that was going on at that time. Yeah.
So evidently then, these monuments in the story in the stars is of a much greater importance, was what I'm getting from you while by listening, than to religions than what most people would, up front realize, in other words.
Well, I agree with that. We don't know exactly why, but they kept it secret. They didn't tell anybody. They obviously knew about it, and they thought it was important, but they kept it a big, big secret.
Mm-hmm. So then it's almost like there is a conspiracy somewhere down the road, but you just can't pinpoint it.
Yeah, sounds like it. Yeah.
Now, on your book, does it just cover the story of creation, or does it go on to cover any of the other stories in the Bible, like the flood? Or
what I also show is that there's a very, very distinct link between this whole thing, the patterns around the constellation, and the book of Revelation, which takes us a lot nearer, takes us into the sort of what we'll call the beginnings of the Christian era. And most of the things mentioned in Revelation can be found in and around this constellation. All the patterns, all the things, can all be found there. And not only that, at that time, there was a Greek practice which has since become known as numerology. Then it wasn't called that, but we call it numerology. Where what the Greeks used to do was they put a numerical value to each letter, and therefore each letter had a value, and therefore each word had a value, which was the sum of the numbers of the letters in the word, and each sentence had a value, which was the sum of all the letters in the sentence. Excuse me. They did this, and the book of Revelation, you probably know this, was written in ancient Greek. It wasn't written in Hebrew or any other language. It was written in ancient Greek. And so it was not unreasonable to have a look at that book and put those numerical values against each of the letters in the original Greek text, which I did. Now, when you do that, what you'll find is that all sorts of things come out of it based on the numbers. The actual revolution of the pole position in the sky, I said, takes 26,000 years. It actually takes 25,920 years. Now, when I did the Revelation thing and I put 25,920 years and said, what group of letters add up to 25,920? There's only one group of letters that do. And it's a group of letters which talks about making a circle in the sky. What's all that about?
I couldn't begin to tell you, but it does make me wonder if the answer to the 606 enigma can be found in Ursa Major as well.
Well, that may be true. 666 is a strange number, and let me just talk to you about that. In the relatively recent past, some scraps of scrolls have been discovered in, the Middle East, and there's a strong body of fairly authoritative opinion in the universities now that the text of Revelation was changed. And that the original thing didn't say 666, it said 661, if I remember rightly. I'm going from memory now because I'm not reading it as I'm talking to you. And they changed it. And in the book, I give a reason why they might have done that, because it changes the meaning of it if you do that. Not just in terms of the 666, but it actually changes the actual meaning of the whole thing. So there is a question mark over that. I don't know the answer, but I do know that this piece of scroll was found, very ancient one, from about that time, and it's just worded slightly differently.
I remember hearing about that. I know what you're talking about. And that leads me to wonder if maybe that could have been changed by the early church fathers on purpose, because if anybody knew what their correct numbers were, and knew what you're talking about the story in the stars, if they couldn't put two and two together and get kind of wise.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah.
See, that's why I think books like yours are, definitely worth reading. They're very interesting. Even if you're not certain of something, once you get so much evidence compiled pointing in a certain direction, it's only logical sense to try to follow through and find more if you're in a position to do it.
Sure. Well, I agree with that. And frankly, we've all got to be open-minded. One of the problems about the world today is that there's a lot of closed-minded folk about, and if you look at what they do because of their closed-minded beliefs, they kill one another. Well, what's all that about, Royce? Why are we killing one another?
I know, it's a very sad situation. I mean, just since 9/11, that was all about jihad.
Oh, exactly. There's an example of people with beliefs, and their beliefs led them to do something which you and I would probably agree was reprehensible. But they aren't the only ones in the world who are in that situation. There's people out there with beliefs which mean they do pretty nasty things to one another,
Well, the scary thing about it is there's really, from what I can tell, a very small handful of people at the top that really know what they're doing, that's orchestrating this, and the people down on the lower end that's actually pulling the trigger, they think they're doing what's right because they've received a bunch of BS from the top that they don't know is BS.
Well, that may be exactly true. I don't know. I mean, you go back to I'm in the UK. You go back to what happened here in the Middle Ages, where the Protestants and the Catholics killed one another, and because somebody believed this, he got his head chopped off, and da 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 da. So what's happening now, as far as the jihad thing is concerned, is sort of in many ways similar to what happened in Europe with regard to the various branches of Christianity, I don't know, whatever, let's say 800-900 years ago. It's not that dissimilar, really.
Yeah, that's true. Now, also, you was talking about this circle around this pole. Yeah. You're talking about precision on that, aren't you?
Oh, you are. Oh, you're talking about, precision, absolutely. The Earth just wobbles around in a circle.
And this 25,900, I think it was.
20 years. 25,920.
Okay, I was close. That's known as a great year, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Some people do call it that. Yeah, of course they do. Yeah.
Now, if my memory serves from my studies, the ancient Egyptians started their precession at the very beginning at a time called Zep Tepi.
Yeah.
Now, that would probably be where your creational story starts at in Ursa Major, and it starts, would you say, to the north and you go south and follow the story as you go?
Well, sort of, yeah. I mean, look, the Earth wobbles, so it's always north. At the time, it's north. Like now, we think the North Pole is north. When, at the time we think of as creation starting, where our North Pole was in the west, but that's because the circle has moved around now. So at 2013, it's almost pointed at the star Polaris, which is in the constellation of Ursa Minor. But it's a whole quadrant around, Also, I show in the stars that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I didn't know you were fixing to speak.
I was saying, I also show in the book that if you take 1/7 of the circle, 1/7, exactly 1/7, and take that from the point that the pole position moves into the constellation of Bootes, and then comes out of the constellation of Ursa Major, that you can see, and there's the picture where you can see Adam and Eve and the devil and all of that in that 7th. Maybe that's the place which is the 7th day. The creation of man.
Right. That's what I say. It sounds like 7 days of creation.
It's quite a strange coincidence that it's just a 7th of the whole circle of poles.
So it'd be kind of like having a big circle divided like a pie into 7ths.
That's it. You got it.
So if you were to assign what the ancients would have known as an aeon or an age to a seventh, how much of a time frame